Graham read my journeyman application, picked up his pen, and then slid the unsigned page back across the desk. "Not yet, Nora," he said. "Mason's future has to come first." For 6 years, I had handled the commercial jobs nobody else wanted: overnight shutdowns, emergency repairs, and systems complicated enough to close an entire building if I made one mistake. But without Graham's signature, none of those hours officially belonged to me. At first, I thought it was favoritism. Then, an important client sent me an old file from a job I remembered down to the final voltage reading. By the time I reached the signature line, I understood why Graham needed me to remain unlicensed. He hadn't just delayed my career. He had built Mason's reputation out of my work. I had been with Cole Electrical Services for 6 years, long enough to know which breakers in our shop tripped when the air compressor started and which clients called me instead of the office when something serious failed. On paper, though, I was still listed as a basic electrical assistant. I told myself the title did not matter, the work did. That was my first mistake. Graham Cole married my mother when I was 14. By the time I finished trade school, he was the closest thing I had to a father in Charlotte. He hired me at 26 and promised I would learn the business from the ground up. Mason, his son, started 8 months later. Graham introduced him to clients as the future of Cole Electrical. He introduced me as family helping out. The difference sounded small until you watched it happen for years. Mason attended estimates, shook hands, and left before the difficult work began. I stayed for the shutdowns. I traced faults through crowded electrical rooms, replaced failed control components, and explained to nervous facilities managers why their building would be safe by morning. When a job went well, Graham praised the team. When something went wrong, he asked what I had missed. Luis Ortega was the only supervisor who treated me like my work had weight. He was a retired master electrician who had spent 4 decades in the trade and could hear a failing contactor before anyone else smelled it. "You don't need Graham's permission to be good," he told me once. At the time, I laughed. I still believed permission and proof were the same thing. 3 years into my apprenticeship, Summit Industrial Electric offered me an interview. They handled larger commercial systems, paid better, and had a formal licensing path. I turned them down before meeting them. Graham had just landed a hospital maintenance contract, and my mother said leaving then would make the company look unstable. I called it loyalty. Looking back, it was fear with a family name attached. The morning my application came back unsigned, I carried it straight to Graham's office. Mason was already inside, leaning against the filing cabinet while Graham reviewed a bid. I placed the form on his desk. "The board needs verification of my hours." Graham did not read it. He already knew what it was. "You're rushing," he said. "I've completed the required time." "That doesn't mean you're ready." I looked at Mason. He studied the floor. Graham folded his hands and said, "This company needs a clear succession plan. Mason has to establish himself first." I asked what Mason's future had to do with my license. My stepfather's expression hardened. "Everything doesn't have to be a competition, Nora." He said it as if I were stealing something by asking for my own record. That afternoon, my mother found me reorganizing material bins in the warehouse. Elaine managed payroll, benefits, and every personnel file in the company. She lowered her voice. "Graham will verify 18 months. I stared at her. "I worked 6 years. He's willing to meet you halfway." There are offers so insulting they clarify the entire argument. This was one of them. The next morning, Elaine placed a contract beside my coffee. If I remained with Cole Electrical for 2 additional years, accepted any assignments Graham considered necessary, and agreed to train Mason on my commercial accounts, the company would consider verifying my complete experience. "Consider?" I asked. She avoided my eyes. "It protects everyone." "No, it protects the company from me leaving." Her silence answered before she did. I took the contract to the North Carolina licensing office during lunch. The woman behind the counter read it twice, then pushed it back with a frown. "Your employer is not the only person who can verify witnessed hours," she said. "A qualified former supervisor may submit supporting evidence." For the first time that week, I felt the ground shift beneath Graham's decision. Then she looked at my file again. "You should also request your personnel records," she added carefully. "There's a safety complaint attached to your employment history." The licensing clerk printed the complaint summary for me. According to Graham, I had energized a commercial panel without authorization during a warehouse renovation 6 months earlier. The report described me as careless, impatient, and unwilling to follow supervision. I remembered that job clearly. I also remembered leaving the site before the replacement equipment arrived. Someone had built a version of me on paper that did not match the day I had lived. I called Luis from the parking lot. He answered on the 4th ring. When I explained the unsigned application, he went quiet. "I'm retired, Nora. You supervised me for almost 4 years." "I know what I supervised." "Then verify it." His voice lowered. "Graham doesn't forget people who embarrass him." Then he ended the call. Luis's refusal hurt more than Graham's. He had taught me how to read a one-line diagram, how to slow down when everyone around me was panicking, and how to recognize the difference between confidence and carelessness. If even he would not stand behind my work, I began wondering whether the licensing board would see me exactly as Graham wanted them to. An assistant asking for credit she could not prove. That evening, Dana Brooks called. She managed facilities for a medical office complex where I had repaired a recurring power problem 2 years earlier. "I heard you might be leaving Cole Electrical," she said. I asked who told her. "Mason. He said you were stepping back from technical work." I had never said anything like that. Then Dana added, "I found something you should probably see." The report arrived in my inbox 10 minutes later. I recognized the job before I reached the address. The voltage readings were written in the order I always used. The repair method included a temporary bypass I had designed after midnight when the manufacturer's support line stopped answering. Even one misspelled abbreviation was mine. At the bottom, beneath "Technician Responsible," was Mason Cole's signature. I called Dana back and asked whether Mason had been present. She laughed once, confused. "Mason? No. You were there with 2 helpers." She searched her phone while we spoke and sent me 3 photographs from the job. In every picture, I was standing beside the open equipment. The timestamps showed Mason had never entered the building that night. The next morning, Mason followed me into the supply room and shut the door. His face had lost its usual easy confidence. "You requested your personnel file." It was not a question. "I requested my own records." He rubbed both hands over his hair. "Dad put that safety complaint in there for a reason." "To protect people?" "To protect the company." Those were 2 different answers, and we both knew it. I asked him whether he had signed Dana's service report. He looked toward the closed door. "Dad said the client needed to see continuity in leadership." "That report said you performed the work." "It was one signature." "No, Mason. It was my work." He told me I was making everything harder than it needed to be. That was Graham's language coming out of his mouth. I spent lunch rebuilding the warehouse job from records Graham could not edit. The supplier invoice showed the replacement disconnect had been delivered at 4:47 p.m. My timecard showed I had clocked out at 3:12. An email from the site supervisor thanked me for identifying the fault before I left and said Mason would oversee installation when the part arrived. The complaint claimed I energized it at 5:30. I had been 40 minutes away. I placed the records in front of Mason after everyone else left. He read the delivery time, then my time card. His shoulders dropped. "I approve the change," he said. I waited. The site manager wanted power restored. Dad said we couldn't afford another delay. And when it went wrong? His eyes lifted to mine, ashamed, but not surprised. "Dad said the complaint had to go under your name. You weren't licensed, so he thought no one would question it." That was the moment I stopped believing Graham was merely favoring his son. He had been preparing to discredit me long before I asked to leave. Mason's confession did not make me feel victorious. It made the whole company look different. For years, I had treated Graham's criticism like a hard apprenticeship, something meant to sharpen me. Now I understood that every warning, every delayed raise, and every time he told me I needed more supervision had served the same purpose. He needed me skilled enough to carry the difficult work, but uncertain enough not to demand credit for it. I told Mason to write down what happened at the warehouse. He refused. So I said, "Then don't expect me to protect you when the records speak for themselves." That night, I spread 6 years of pay stubs, schedules, and service reports across my kitchen table. The pattern was easier to see once I stopped treating each insult as a separate event. My payroll classification had barely changed. My responsibilities had. I had gone from carrying tools to planning shutdowns, directing crews, speaking with inspectors, and solving failures clients had already paid other companies to fix. Still, every official document described me as an assistant. Graham had not forgotten to promote me. He had carefully kept me below the level of the work I was already doing. I called Luis again the next morning. This time, I did not ask him to help me. I told him about the false safety complaint, Mason's signature on Dana's report, and the contract Elaine had placed in front of me. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Meet me at the diner on South Boulevard at 7 tonight." His voice still sounded reluctant, but it no longer sounded afraid. Before he hung up, he added, "Bring copies. Not originals. You don't know yet how much paper can disappear when family decides it belongs to them." Luis arrived with an old canvas tool bag instead of a briefcase. Inside were 12 black notebooks, their covers softened by years of grease and job site dust. "I kept one every season," he said. Each page listed dates, addresses, crew assignments, equipment numbers, and the work performed. Luis had written everything in the blunt language of a man who trusted facts more than memory. Beside dozens of difficult assignments, my name appeared first. Nora led troubleshooting. Nora coordinated shutdown. Nora corrected Mason's wiring plan. I looked up. Luis said quietly, "Graham knew exactly what you were doing." Then Luis told me why he had really retired. A year earlier, he had asked Graham to reclassify me and begin formal verification of my hours. Graham refused. He said Mason needed time to grow into the role. Luis explained, "I told him Mason wasn't growing. He was standing in your shadow and calling it experience." The argument became personal. Graham accused Luis of undermining the family. Luis left 2 months later. "I should have taken this further then," he said, touching the notebooks. "I told myself leaving was enough." "It wasn't," I said. He nodded. "No, it wasn't." The notebooks gave me dates. Dana gave me context. When I showed her the service report with Mason's signature, she opened her company's archived work orders. The problem was bigger than one job. Her facilities team had requested me by name for 3 years. On 2 separate contracts, Dana had asked Cole Electrical to assign me as the permanent site lead. Graham had answered that I preferred residential work and did not want the responsibility. I had never seen those emails. Dana stared at the screen. "We thought you kept turning us down." I remembered every time Graham had told me major clients did not see me as leadership material. Dana printed the old requests and signed a statement confirming who had actually performed the work. Then she opened one of Cole Electrical's invoices. The labor line stopped me. Cole Electrical had billed her company at the rate for a qualified commercial electrician, nearly 3 times what my payroll records showed Graham had paid me. I checked another invoice, then another. Every time I had led a complex job, the client paid for qualified expertise. The company paid me as an assistant. Dana looked embarrassed, though none of it was her fault. "I assumed that rate was going to you." "So did I said. That was the lie Graham had depended on. The licensing issue had never been only about Mason's future. Keeping me unlicensed protected Graham's margin. He could send me to perform advanced work, bill the client at a higher rate, and keep my wages tied to the lowest classification he could defend. If I became licensed, I could demand market pay, leave for another contractor, or ask clients why Mason's name kept appearing on my reports. My missing signature was not family favoritism. It was financial control. And the false complaint gave Graham something to point to if I ever questioned why 6 years of responsibility had earned me 18 months of recognition. I took copies of the invoices and payroll records to my mother. Elaine was alone in the office, closing the weekly payroll. I placed the documents beside her keyboard and asked one question. Who chose my classification? She looked at the pay stubs first, then the invoices. Her expression did not change quickly enough. That was how I knew. Graham makes staffing decisions, she said. You process payroll. I process what I'm given. You also wrote the contract asking me to stay 2 more years. Her fingers rested on the calculator. Then she whispered, We needed time. Not Graham. We. Elaine finally admitted that she knew clients were being charged far more for my labor than I was being paid. She said the company had debts, Mason needed a chance to become credible, and Graham planned to make things right once the succession was secure. I asked how long that was supposed to take. She had no answer. Then I asked whether she knew about the false safety complaint. Her eyes moved toward the locked personnel cabinet. That movement told me enough. I stood, gathered my copies, and said, You weren't caught between your husband and your daughter. You chose a side. As I reached the door, Elaine called after me. Graham will ruin your application before he lets you take those clients. I turned back. For the first time, her warning did not frighten me, because now I had Luis's notebooks, Dana's records, the delivery timeline, and proof that my own mother knew exactly why my work had been kept invisible. I scanned every document and stored copies in 3 places. Luis's notebook stayed with him. Dana kept the original work orders. I kept only records I was legally entitled to use: my pay stubs, schedules, emails, and personnel file. Graham had spent years controlling the paperwork. I was not going to give him one careless mistake he could use against me. The licensing office gave me a checklist. Luis could verify the hours he personally supervised. Other periods required supporting schedules, permits, client statements, and proof of the work performed. The safety complaint would be reviewed separately. Nothing was guaranteed. For the first time, I understood why Graham had relied on my fear. Proving 6 years without him would be difficult. It was not impossible. 2 days later, Graham removed me from Dana's account. He claimed the client had requested leadership continuity. Dana called me before he finished announcing it. I requested you, she said. Again. That afternoon, my building access was limited, and Mason was told to accompany me on every assignment. Graham wanted me to feel watched. Instead, he showed me how frightened he was of what I already knew. I contacted Summit Industrial Electric. The manager remembered my old application and agreed to meet discreetly. She reviewed my project history and asked technical questions for nearly an hour. Then she said, Pass the journeyman examination and we can discuss a field position. It was not a promise, but it was the first opportunity in years that did not require me to remain smaller than the work. Mason found me loading conduit into the company van. I failed the exam twice, he said. I stopped. He admitted Graham had paid for preparation courses, private tutoring, and both attempts. Mason had told no one. I'm better at estimating and sales, he said. Dad knows that. Then why take my reports? His answer was quiet. Because disappointing him felt worse than betraying you. I understood the fear. I did not forgive the choice. Graham called a family meeting the next morning. Elaine sat beside him with a prepared agreement. Mason remained near the door. Graham offered to verify all 6 years immediately. In return, I had to remain temporarily, train Mason on my commercial accounts, and sign a non-compete agreement restricting where I could work afterward. He leaned back as though he had finally become generous. This gives everyone what they need. It gave him everything. I asked for time to review the agreement. Graham smiled because he thought hesitation meant surrender. Elaine touched my hand and said, "This can all go away." That sentence settled something in me. They still believed the problem was the conflict, not the stolen credit, false complaint, or years of underpayment. I took the agreement home. I did not sign it. Luis completed his verification statement 3 days later. Dana signed a detailed account of the jobs I led. The warehouse supervisor confirmed I had left before the unsafe change. Delivery records established the exact timeline. We added permits, crew schedules, photographs, and service reports. Luis looked at the finished packet. "This should have been one signature," he said. "It was never about the signature," I replied. "It was about permission to leave." Graham learned I had contacted the licensing office independently. He accused me of taking confidential company information and warned employees that I was trying to damage the business. Summit paused further discussions until my credentials were approved. For one terrible afternoon, I wondered whether he could still trap me through delay alone. Then Dana called. Her company was preparing to rebid its electrical service contract, and this time, Cole Electrical would have to prove who was qualified to perform the work. I submitted the complete packet without Graham's signature. 6 days later, the licensing office called. The safety complaint had been rejected after the delivery timeline and witness statement were reviewed. Luis's verification and the supporting records had been accepted. I was approved to sit for the examination. Before I could tell anyone, Graham sent me one message. "My office. Tomorrow morning. Final offer." He still believed I needed something from him. He had no idea his leverage had already expired. Graham was waiting behind his desk when I arrived. The non-compete agreement lay open in front of him. "Sign it," he said, "and I'll verify everything today." I placed the licensing office approval letter beside it. "I don't need your verification anymore." For the first time in 6 years, Graham looked at me without seeing an employee he controlled. He saw someone already gone. He read the letter twice. Then he accused Luis of falsifying records and Dana of interfering in company business. I told him the board had accepted the notebooks, schedules, permits, work orders, and witness statements. The safety complaint had also been rejected. Graham's face tightened. "You're throwing away your family over a license." "No," I said. "You used family to keep me from earning one." I sat for the examination 2 weeks later. The questions were difficult, but they were familiar. Load calculations, code requirements, grounding, motors, commercial systems. Things I had been doing while Graham called me an assistant. When the result appeared, I read it 3 times. Passed. Luis was waiting outside in his truck. I handed him the paper through the window. He smiled and said, "About time the paperwork caught up with the electrician." Summit Industrial Electric hired me the following Monday. My starting pay was higher than Graham had ever offered, but the title mattered more. Journeyman Electrician. My first assignment was a manufacturing facility with an aging distribution system and a shutdown window of 6 hours. Nobody introduced me as family helping out. They introduced me as the person leading the work. Cole Electrical began feeling my absence almost immediately. Mason could price jobs and speak confidently in meetings, but he could not replace 6 years of field knowledge. 2 commercial clients delayed projects until Graham assigned a licensed electrician. One requested proof of qualifications before allowing anyone into its electrical rooms. The company finally hired an experienced journeyman at full market salary. The money Graham had saved on me disappeared in one employment offer. Mason called me after his 3rd week trying to manage my old accounts. "I told Dad I'm moving into estimating," he said. Graham had refused at first. Then Mason declined to sign another service report for work he had not performed. "I should have stopped it years ago," he said. "Yes," I replied. I did not comfort him, but I believed him when he said he was done pretending. Dana invited Summit to compete for her company's service contract. She made it clear there would be no favors. We submitted pricing, staffing qualifications, safety records, and references like every other bidder. Summit won 2 of the 4 sites, not because I had exposed Graham, because Dana already knew the quality of my work, even when someone else's name had been written beneath it. My mother came to my apartment one evening without calling. Elaine said the new electrician was expensive and unfamiliar with the clients. She asked me to return for 2 weeks and help train him. "We're still family," she said. I looked at the woman who had processed every lowered paycheck and locked every false record into my file. "Family should have been the reason you told the truth," I said, "not the reason I return." I did not sue Cole Electrical or try to destroy it. Graham kept the company. Mason moved into sales and estimating, where he was finally useful without borrowing someone else's competence. The business became smaller and less profitable because qualified labor cost what qualified labor was worth. That was not revenge I invented. It was the price Graham had avoided paying for 6 years. 3 months later, I completed my first major service report for Summit. I checked the readings, attached the photographs, and signed the final page. Nora Bennett, Journeyman Electrician. I stared at the license number beneath my name for a moment before closing the file. For 6 years, my work had kept another man's reputation alive. Now the work, the credit, and the future belonged to the same person. Me.